Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison with Redmond Mag. I am thrilled to welcome you to today's event entitled Building Your Blueprint, Essential Strategies for Auditing, Alerting, and Recovering from Microsoft Intune and Entra ID Environment, sponsored by Cayosoft. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping details. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please make sure to type those into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. Cayosoft has provided some resources which correspond with today's event, so please take a moment to check those out. They are located to the right of your audience console. Today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to rewatch the presentation or share with a colleague. And now I'm so thrilled to announce our speakers for today. We have the pleasure of hearing from some members of the Cayosoft team. Today with us we have Kevin Sullivan, Principal Product Manager, Intune Customer Experience Engineering at Microsoft, Dmitry Sotnikov, Chief Product Officer at Cayosoft, Craig Birch, Technical Evangelist and Principal Security Engineer at Cayosoft. So we are in for a great event, and with that, I'll pass the time over to Dmitry.
Thank you, Allison. Right, so we have quite a packed agenda today. We'll talk about, in general, what it means, what Blueprint for Resilience means for your cloud infrastructure, your identity infrastructure, your device infrastructure. We'll talk about what pillars comprise that blueprint. Then Kevin will talk about the native capabilities that Microsoft provide in terms of your cloud resilience. And then we'll talk about how Cayosoft's functionality augments that and the whole better together story. So with that, let's get started. So security and resilience are obviously hard in the world today. We're living in a very dynamic world, and in the world of interconnected entities, in remote, in cloud. And when you think about all the identities and endpoints and the configuration changes that happen all the time to these identities, to your systems, it becomes a harder story. It's an ever-evolving landscape, and obviously threats, whether these are external threats or internal mistakes, can happen anytime in any of them. So it's not just a single thing, really. And so the biggest risks there arise from just not knowing what you have, right, in lacking visibility into your configuration, in potential gaps there from compliance or security perspective, and risks to which you get exposed to your access permissions or security policies, etc. And so establishing that visibility into what you have and then taking control over what you have are really the key components of making your infrastructure resilient. So let's talk about how you get there. And so these essentially comprise of three things. Monitoring, so knowing what you have, then identifying what you have to find any security gaps, any misconfigurations, or any threats, any attacks. And then finally being able to roll things back to undo any changes or to go to an altogether isolated standby environment if worst things come to worst. So let's talk a little bit about each of them, and then we'll go into the products and see them in action. So monitoring and sort of keeping an audit trail of what you have are obviously the cornerstone of any resilience. You can't improve what you don't know, right? And so you really need to make sure that you know your configuration and be able to analyze your configuration, and that you can keep track of any changes. And obviously, if we talk about Microsoft cloud environments, then the key directories for that are your Entra ID and your Intune. And so your directory and your systems and your policies and your objects are essentially split between these two, and both are equally important. And mistakes, administrative mistakes in any of them, or attacks on any of them can have significant impact. For example, if we talk about, say, conditional access policies, imagine that you missed a change in conditional access policy that, say, exempts an application administrator from MFA. And that means that potentially you're exposing that policy, you're exposing yourself to someone performing an attack on that administrative account, and without MFA, without multi-factor authentication, getting access to your critical resources. Or say if an administrator unintentionally updates your baseline Intune policy, obviously that can have impact on all the devices that you have. They might get locked out and disrupt your operations. And so you see that it's a combination of things that can happen accidentally. These are complex systems, or direct attacks, or leaving yourself vulnerable to direct attacks. And so when you have that ability to analyze what you have and to analyze what's going on, you can really start finding and fixing those misconfigurations that could lead to a lateral movement or to any kind of attack, and you can start detecting those attacks. And so on the screen, you can see a few examples of the things that you would track, but obviously this is just a small subset. The key is that you need to be able to identify and fix your security vulnerabilities, your potential indicators of misconfiguration, like Entra ID applications with risky write permissions. So if someone gets a hold of that application, they can escalate their privileges. Or being able to identify, again, hybrid users that have privileged roles in Entra ID. And so, again, there's a lateral movement attack when someone gets a hold of such a hybrid account and then can go from on-premise to the cloud, or from one Entra ID tenant to another. So you really need to be able to get that instant visibility into what's going on to all devices, their compliance status, into your accounts, your groups, your applications, and obviously be able to get real-time alerts, potentially not on all changes, but at least on all the risky changes. So if you are under attack, you would want to know about that immediately. You would want to get that email or Teams notification or some other way of getting instantly alerted of what's going on. And finally, the recovery piece, right? You obviously want to make sure that not only you can detect attacks, but you can recover from the attacks. And the recovery really falls into a few different categories. So there's automated recovery, if automated rollback or prevention of changes. So if a change that contradicts your policies happen, you would want that to be prevented. So you would want that to be immediately and automatically rolled back. Then there are some suspicious changes which you would probably just want to be alerted on, but you would want to go into them and look into the details and then roll them back manually. And then finally, obviously, worst thing comes to worst, you might need to have some sort of a standby environment or some sort of mass rollback capabilities to recover from really bad attack. And again, there are some examples here on the screen of what kind of changes you would typically want to be able to roll back automatically or manually, but obviously it's not an exhaustive list. So these are the three pillars that we will be talking about and showing in our demos later in that presentation. But for now, let me pass the stage to Kevin Sullivan from Microsoft so he can talk about the native capabilities that Microsoft provides.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I want to just start real quick at a high level and step back a little bit, but I'll go through this quickly. So from a Microsoft perspective, our mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And how does that sort of translate down the stack into our security business? It's sort of important because we lead everything across Microsoft with security discussions these days. We are committed to protecting our customers and working with our partners to protect our customers from current and emerging threats related to security and privacy. We're going to continue to focus our attention You'll hear Satya talk about this in public, Satya Nadella. You'll hear other of our leaders out there talking about this, but security is going to drive everything. It's so important. And that's why this framework that you just laid out, Dimitri, to me resonates so well. This monitor, detect, remediate, there's a really nice logical flow there to ensure that we're constantly looking at the security posture of our environments. Now, I represent Intune most days of my life, but we're just a component part of the Microsoft security business. And across our business, we have Intune, of course, being the management component, but we have the identity component in Entra, we have the compliance component in Purview and we have Defender and Sentinel. So we have this broad set of capabilities that address needs for organizations, but sometimes in different parts of the organization. And even though my attention is mostly on Intune and Entra, the reality is we care about it all. We care about all platforms. We care about all AIs, all clouds, whatever. We need to meet our customers where they are. So going deep into the Intune side of things, Intune is obviously the management component. So we have a massive back end of data from all kinds of tenants that are being configured through Intune, and we're getting feeds from them. How do we capitalize on that, and how do we grow that? We essentially, our agenda, our purpose in life is to ensure that those configurations that an organization requires to maintain productivity in a secure posture get delivered efficiently. You get responses back from those devices efficiently. You work within the context of compliance and configuration and app deployments, et cetera, as Dimitri pointed out. And that core capability of Intune has always been very critical to us. Now, when we started years ago thinking about this zero trust posture, we were informed in a lot of different areas on the kinds of things that we as a platform partner, as a organization, should invest in and should focus our attention in. So we actually started building out this thing that you'll hear about called the Intune Suite. And the Intune Suite is a really important part, but it's an optional part of the solution that we provide. So when we talk about from a zero trust perspective, you need to verify explicitly, can I see this? We have a cloud PKI remote help capability. We need to enforce least privilege capabilities. We have endpoint privilege management. We have tunnel for unmanaged devices. All these point solutions that sort of come together to build out the zero trust story. And then, of course, assume breach. That we live in this world now where we just have to assume that someone's trying to get in or someone's doing something that they shouldn't be. And we have our analytics side of the house, including advanced analytics, our enterprise app catalog, or enterprise app management solution to ensure that we can keep folks up to date as we move forward. Now that's sort of, keep the lights on type discussion, Intune Core, Intune Suite, where we fit in the security world. But the Copilot thing is sort of new. So still for most folks, it's sort of new, even though it's been around for a year or so now. But Security Copilot is giving admins and SOC administrators the ability to look at the back end of their service in a very, very efficient way and get great insights out of the service. And when we talk about Intune, think about this. Cayosoft, other partners have great, rich amounts of data that help you understand your enterprise. So does Intune, so does Entra, so does Sentinel, blah, blah, blah. To be able to go to an AI assistant like Copilot and say, hey, I have this very complicated question, I can get answers from Intune. I can get answers from partners if they choose to build plugins. I can get answers from all the different moving parts within Intune. You're going to hear us talk more and more about Security Copilot because I think it's very clear the impact that this technology is going to have for both SOCs and IT pros, and we're going to continue to double down on this. Now, I hate to give you this eye chart of a slide, but it's actually sort of an interesting flow. I want to sort of lay out how Security Copilot exists in the world. So in the center, you can see Security Copilot, but a prompt is generated from one of the given solutions, or for those of you who have played with it a little bit, we have this standalone environment called securitycopilot.microsoft.com. And you generate the prompt, and it goes out to the core processor, which is going to send out the prompt to be tokenized. So it's going to break that down and figure out which plugins. Is Intune supposed to answer this, or Defender, or Sentinel? It's going to figure out who's best suited. And that tokenized prompt is going to go back to the core with a response that says, oh, we're going to have Intune answer this, or we're going to have this third-party plugin answer this. And then it's going to go to that through our flow, which includes responsible AI, to get the response from the models. And then ultimately, it's going to get back to responding to that prompt. So sorry for taking a sidetrack into that depth, but it's super interesting how we've gone from an experience where I'm doing very tangible things within portals, and now I have this Copilot experience that can help me, that can assist me, help me figure out more details, find vulnerabilities more efficiently, and hopefully get to a point where we're remediating them. So keep that in mind. Security Copilot for our team is super important. Partners matter in that context, because by ourselves, we can't answer all questions for customers. So not only on Security Copilot, but partners help us address issues for our shared customers that aren't coming out directly of the platform or aren't being exposed through tooling. So that ultimately is going to help us grow our service. It's going to help us build more capabilities, and it deliver value directly to the customers very quickly. We also learn from our partners what they're focused on, what they're attending to, and that helps us understand more opportunities to build the service and build a stronger ecosystem between ourselves and our many, many, many partners. Cayosoft this year became a part of our Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, which is sort of a concierge part of our partner program. So thanks, Cayosoft, for being a member. But it's really focused on partners, whether they're MSP partners or ISV partners, that are building solutions that integrate into our services that help us achieve our goals, help customers be more efficient and more effective as they journey to the cloud, help our partners do different things. So again, great program. The partners who were in there were selected. They went through a nomination process, so I'm really happy that Cayosoft has become a part of that. But yeah, I have really loved my engagement with Cayosoft and our ability to sort of have very good open dialogue about what kinds of solutions we need, what kinds of things partners can deliver, and we're going to continue to do that. So appreciate the invite here, and I love your framework, your paradigm of your 3 pillars is pretty awesome. I think this is where I turn it over to you, Craig.
So thank you, Kevin. Let's summarize quickly before we go into demo. So we talked about, Kevin explained the security focus that Microsoft has and what Microsoft's native platform delivers and how partners fit into that platform. And so we'll now have Craig demonstrate how Cayosoft adds to these capabilities, and that additional monitoring, change auditing for Entra ID and Intune, the ability to find insecure configurations or indicators of attack, or indicators of compromise, and finally the mitigation steps that Cayosoft provides to Microsoft platforms. So over to you, Craig.
All right, thanks, Dimitri. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And now you guys should be seeing Cayosoft Guardian. And the first thing I want to talk about is our threat detection capability. From a proactive perspective, what we're able to do is go out and ingest the current state of a customer's environment. So we go out and look for key misconfigurations with both an Entra ID, on-prem Active Directory, Exchange One Line, as well as Microsoft Intune. And then once we do that initial ingestion, we can send it through our analysis process and look for things that would allow an attacker to do what? Well, to allow them to get lateral movement, absolutely. But also, what are they usually trying to get? They're usually trying to get additional privileges. So privilege escalation is one of the keys. So I say these are the avenues or attack paths that allow an attacker to be able to move on and do further damage within the ecosystem, within Entra ID or within Microsoft Intune. So what does that look like inside the product? Well, the first thing is we have these different threat alerts that will come in. So I'm going to focus on some threat alerts around multi-factor authentication, right? Because the ecosystem that we're talking about today, especially from a modern day attack surface, it comprises of identities, right? Identity attacks are on the rise, as well as we have devices, but we also have applications that we have to concern ourselves with as well from an attack perspective, as well as even multi-cloud platforms where we could be plugged into. So as Kevin showed with Security Copilot and the Microsoft ecosystem, right, it's focused primarily on the Microsoft stack, but it also goes into other areas that traditionally are not part of the Microsoft stack. Same here. We have to look at the holistic picture. So here I can go in and see that I have some misconfigurations in my environment already, where here, this particular user just doesn't have any multi-factor authentication configured for their particular account. And not only are we going to highlight and show exactly here's what the threat is through the threat description, but we're going to go one step further and provide you with the prescriptive guidance on how to go in and remediate this and shore up this particular vulnerability. So that's just one example. So that's from the identity perspective. But let's look at things like maybe an Entra ID application. And here we can see that we're looking at Microsoft Entra ID applications with risky write permissions, right? So we can see in here that not only do we find some of these applications that have write permissions through an API, but we're also going to then help you identify those and tell you exactly what you need to do to remediate these. Now, I'm not going to say that all Microsoft Entra ID applications with write permissions are bad, because you might need those for X, Y, and Z application. But we want to bring it to your attention so that you can have that enterprise visibility into seeing that, hey, I do have these applications. They have these permissions. Are those permissions appropriate for the application? And if yes, right, nothing need to be done. We can go in and write it, exclude that one. But what if the application is no longer needed, right? So there may be a way that, you may have stood this up for testing initially, but then you find out that, the test is over and you just forgot to clean up the application. So why leave that risk out there in your environment? So we're going to help you first identify where you might have some misconfigurations or what I'll call weaknesses or vulnerabilities, teach you how to clean those up, but we're going to do it across the ecosystem. And like I said, that ecosystem is just not Microsoft Intune. It's not just Microsoft Entra ID. It's other areas that really make up your overall Microsoft landscape, as we talked about. So that's the first part. So now let's move on to what I'm going to talk about is change monitoring. So change history or change monitoring here, we can see in the change history, all changes that occur inside of your environment. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to give you an example that you can kind of think about. So let's just pretend that we had a user who went out on PTO and they needed to do something urgently for their boss. And when they tried to log on, they weren't able to log in because of some conditional access policy. Well, the boss calls the IT admin, and the IT admin says, okay, I'm going to temporarily allow this particular user to bypass multi-factor authentication, and they can go about doing their work. The IT admin does that work, right? And it's something that they need to do, but then forgets about it. That same user, they're still on PTO, accidentally opens up a phishing email, gets phished, and then they be able to, because they don't have multi-factor authentication in place, they're also an application owner inside of Entra ID, they're able to compromise some sensitive data. Without all that visibility, you're never going to be able to quickly see that type of risk in your environment. So what am I talking about? Well, let's pretend Aaron went in there, and let's look at some Entra applications here. So the first thing, let's look at conditional access. So I'm going to go in and filter on changes around conditional access. So I can quickly run a query, and I can see all changes around my conditional access policy. And we can see in here, right, we have these multi-factor authentication for Microsoft, and we can see that there was some excluded users, and we can see that that particular that account, Aaron, was added. But we can also then see that there were some additional policies updated in regards to conditional access as well. And we can see that here we have our risky user policy, right, that we've defined around conditional access that says, hey, we want to make sure that all users fall into this conditional access policy to evaluate if they're a risky user or not. So high-risk users is what we're talking about here. What happened if someone went in and as an admin and accidentally excluded an entire group, like application administrators? Well, then that's very possible for that user to then an attacker to go in and take advantage of that user misconfiguration. And we can see exactly what occurred with this, right? We can see that the risky user policy, well, it didn't have any exclusions, but someone added in what we'll call the application administrator role. And if this was something that we did not want, we could just simply click rollback, and that would initiate a rollback of this particular change in our environment. And now we could put ourselves back into this nice, clean, pristine state where we were before. So it's giving us visibility into those types of changes. But again, that ecosystem's just not around conditional access policies. What if we want to go in and look for other things like Entra ID applications? So let's go back and look at all changes real quick. And I'm going to focus on a particular application here. So we have this application, an Entra ID application, and we can see that the internal contracts HQ confidential data application is used to protect access to a particular application that's used for sensitive information, maybe within a SharePoint. And someone went in and created a certificate on that application so that they can actually authenticate via certificates. I have a rule within my environment that says, hey, I don't allow certificates in my environment for my Entra applications. I only allow certain types of authentication mechanisms, maybe it's client secret, etc. And again, if I want to initiate that rollback, I certainly could do that. But I could also go one step further, and we could go in, where is it at? We can change the workflow step to not just notify us of this, but we can actually initiate an auto rollback as well. So Cayosoft Guardian not only is helping you identify, here is where the misconfiguration occurred, who made the change, what was changed, but it does have the ability to be customized to go in and particularly roll back a change. And that, again, applies to Entra ID applications, but it also applies to Microsoft Intune. And so let's talk about some of the Intune capabilities now. So if we look at Microsoft Intune, and we'll go in and look at it from a 365 perspective, Intune's a complex ecosystem. I'm sure Kevin will back me up on that one. And so we have these devices that are registered inside of your Microsoft Intune environment. And we really want to make sure that we can track which devices are managed, what devices are within compliance. And I can see here I have this one device and it actually fell out of compliance. But I can drill in and look at all the details occurring with this as well. I can see the change history. So here we can see that the first time that this was registered for Intune, how it went up through and updated. And we can see that it also fell out of compliance because of grace period. So let's understand. Well, that it could have fell out of compliance just because the user didn't turn it on, or someone could have went in and changed my base configuration policy to adjust that grace period, and now maybe that impacts all my users. So now we can go in and see what policies that we have in place. If we go in and back to our change history, we can go in and look for our base policy. So let's go in and look for changes to our base policy, and you can see, sure enough, right, this is actually the minimum configuration. So maybe we had something that wasn't configured properly, and now we set it to not configured, right? But also, if someone went in and changed that base policy to change the particular, when a policy when a machine needs to check in for a compliance, it could accidentally lock the user out as well. So again, being able to see all of that within the context of the change which occurs within the change history, but also within tying it back into the Microsoft ecosystem in regards to seeing it from a single pane of glass through, hey, this device is no longer compliant, and then seeing here is all the base policies. So again, here's my base policies. I can go in and quickly see from this area as well what changes may have occurred in the environment in regarding our base policy with Microsoft Intune. So that's one of the things that we can bring to your attention very quickly. And again, if it was something unintentional or we do not want in our environment, we can simply just roll that back into our, back to our previous baseline to get us back to that nice pristine state. So without having those pillars that Dimitri mentioned earlier, right? So if we go back to like building a blueprint, we have to have the ability to understand, well, what changes are occurring in our environment, but across the enterprise stack. And when I say enterprise stack, that's the Microsoft ecosystem. Again, it's Microsoft Entra ID. It's the identities inside of Entra ID. It's Microsoft Intune. It's the conditional access policies. It's the applications. All of those together make up our overall security posture. And if just one of those things are changed and we miss that, it's a potential for us either causing an operational issue or worse yet, an attacker being able to then leverage it and go in and make additional changes and move laterally and get more privileges along the way if needed to then go in and do what they're intending to do, whether that's to go in and exfiltrate data or steal sensitive data, encrypt data, et cetera, or both, right? Because that's what we will typically see is that the attacker will both encrypt data, but they'll also extract it so that they can try to sell it on the dark web. So without that type of visibility, we're just we're going to be blind from all of these changes, especially if you think about the dynamics of this, right? So changes occur on a regular basis. We have devices coming in and out of compliance probably on a regular basis, new applications being added, as well as new Entra ID applications. You throw in groups and roles, and as well as identities, human identities, and then even non-human identities. This gets very hard to see from an overall enterprise visibility perspective. So hopefully you can see how Cayosoft Guardian first can go in and identify, again, where you're currently misconfigured, teach you exactly what you need to do to clean up those misconfigurations. And then that's the first part. We harden that environment, but then also keep us clean moving forward so that we're not creating a gap through either everyday and what I'll call administrative drift, or some kind of nefarious activity occurring. And we can spot that through the change history, either by looking at it from an alerting perspective or just going in and using this to help be more efficient with going in and doing threat hunting and incident and response as well. Because with having all that visibility, we can see all the change history occurring with a particular object, and then we can go in and see if there were any other objects maybe affected with that as well through the change history. And then, like I said, you have the option to either go in and perform a manual rollback, or if it's something that you would never want to see, you can actually even go one step further and create an auto roll, basically change the workflow to do auto rollback for you. So if it picks up that change again, it will automatically roll it back. No admin required to perform that task. It would automatically do it for you. So that concludes the demo. I'm going to open it up for Q&A now. I'm going to
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin, Dimitri, and Craig. That was a great presentation. We do have some questions in from the audience, and I wanted to remind the audience at this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in now, and we'll get them answered for you by our experts. Our first question comes in from Lee. Lee asks, we use Intune, but keeping track of all the changes is hard. How could your solution help?
So as I mentioned earlier, with Cayosoft Guardian, with the change history, looking at the ability to look at where you're currently might have misconfigurations in regards to Intune, but also everyday changes. So if you go in and update a policy, we're going to record that change. If you update a setting within a policy, we're going to go record that change. So it really, because we're pulling all this information in near real time, and surfacing that information, in the change history dashboard, or again, you could set it up to alert you of certain activity as well. It really breaks down those silos. Because if you think about traditionally, you would have maybe you'd have to go to the Microsoft Intune admin portal to pull information, go to another portal to pull another piece of information, where within Cayosoft Guardian, it's right here all in the change history, to be able to highlight that. As well as this information can then be fed into Microsoft Sentinel for further analysis as well.
Our next question comes in from Victor. They want to know, we had an issue where a policy change caused issues in our environment. What's the best way to roll back quickly?
So as I mentioned earlier in the demonstration, is one of the things we can go in and look for is the policy. So we can go in and look for, maybe that policy is called base. And we can see that here is the actual settings that were changed within that policy. So we can see here that here's the before, and then here's the after. And if I want to roll back, so maybe it was configured in this case, right? And someone went and unconfigured it so that basically you don't require any minimum OS. Well, I wouldn't want that in my environment. I want a minimum OS of Windows 10 at least. I can just basically go in, open up that change history record, and click the rollback button, and it will automatically roll it back on behalf of you as the service account inside of Entra ID.
Our next question is in from Paul. Paul wants to know, is there an easy way to find common misconfigurations in Entra ID and in Intune?
There is. So through our threat detection capability, as I mentioned, so we have these different threat alerts and threat definitions. So let's kind of focus on the threat alerts. We can go in and filter on different types of alerts. I can focus on Entra ID, but we can also focus on drilling it down to specific threats as well. So here I'm going to focus on Entra ID type of alerts. We can see which misconfigurations, et cetera, which would be applicable in my environment. So here we can see that, hey, we have some stale privileged Entra user accounts that we might want to clean up in our environment. So we can, again, it'll take you to the threat description and then also the remediation device on how you can, remediation advice, on how you can actually go in and clean that up so that an attacker can't leverage that in your environment. So absolutely, we will highlight those things as part of our threat alerts. And we put in new threat definitions basically every month in regards to our products.
We have one more question in from Anne. Anne wants to know, what benchmark does the Guardian auditor use?
Now, this is a favorite of mine because a lot of customers ask me this. So here, and it's not really an easy way of saying it because it's not a single benchmark that we use. So we start with using MITRE, and we use two types of MITRE, right? We use the MITRE attack framework, which would be around TTPs, but we also base it on MITRE defend, on how do we defend around some of these attacks. And then we use ANSI, which is a standard out of France as well in regards to these attacks. And then lastly, we create some of these in-house or on our own based on what's going on in the real world, right? So if there's a ransomware attack or a ransomware group, maybe like Quillen, that's using a specific technique, and we don't have a attack mechanism around that or a threat detection around that particular attack, we will create that if we can with our solution and then add it and then push it down to our customers so that they will be protected in the future. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not a straight question because it's multiple different standards plus our own.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you'd like to tell the audience today?
Yeah, so if you want to learn more, obviously please visit our website, cayosoft.com. There you can request a personalized demo, so we could give you not just that generic Intune Entra ID demo that we gave today, but we could customize it specifically for your needs and your scenarios, whether it's monitor and recovery or management. There's a lot more that Cayosoft platform provides for Microsoft environments, cloud and hybrid. You can request a trial for our product, ask any question, or get a quote if you're interested. And finally, last but not least, that's not the only webinar that we're giving. We are doing those monthly. And the next one is coming up next in late February, where Craig, who you have just met, will team up with our senior systems engineer, Chad Nichols, and they'll talk about recovery and specifically recovery in hybrid environments when you have both on-premises and cloud components that you need to recover.
Well, thank you so much. It looks like that's all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to any of your questions, or if you still have one, please put it in the console now, and we'll get it over to the Cayosoft team to answer after the webcast. Thank you so much, Kevin, Dimitri, and Craig, for being on with us today, and thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast. And of course, a special thank you to Cayosoft for sponsoring today's event, presented by Redmond Mag. Thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.